Hey guys, Steinixos here. So today, we'll be discussing whether Luffy is truly immune to regular blunt force physical attacks. And by regular, what I mean is no haki, no shockwaves, no special mechanisms, just pure physical blunt impact. So basically, someone punching him, kicking him, or trying to crush him with sheer strength alone. Now, I honestly wouldn't have imagined this to be a controversial topic, because Luffy's immunity to blunt force damage is literally one of the core abilities of his devil fruit. It's one of the very first things we ever learn about him, established all the way back in like chapter 2 of the manga. And it's not something that was just mentioned once and forgotten, it's a running theme repeatedly showcased throughout the entire series. You see, this is a trait that has defined how Luffy fights from the very beginning. It's one of those defining characteristics that makes him, well, Luffy. And interestingly, we didn't even learn about his immunity to electricity until way later, like nearly 200 chapters later, during the Skypiea arc, when he fought Enel. That was the first real exploration of his rubber's natural insulation against lightning, and outside of that, his immunity to electricity was only really otherwise explored in one small instance in Wano against Big Mom. It hasn't really come up much again. So Luffy's immunity to electricity has never played nearly as big a role or appeared as often as his immunity to regular blunt force physical attacks. So the fact that his blunt force immunity, of all things, is the ability people often question, that's honestly kind of strange to me. But anyway, let's take a closer look and actually explore this. Now, when someone says that Luffy isn't immune to regular blunt force physical attacks, it's almost always phrased the same way. Something like, Luffy's not actually immune, he's just highly resistant. If you hit him with enough power, he'll still get hurt. Now, at the most technical level, this isn't entirely false. Every ability, no matter how strong, has limits. You see, if we're, for example, talking about the absolute highest levels of physical power, like blows capable of retconning timelines, then sure, you'd expect that kind of force to hurt Luffy, because at that scale, even if it's technically still a blunt force attack, at that point, it is almost basically no longer the same category of attack that his fruit was designed to nullify. But that's not really what people are usually talking about when they bring this up. What usually happens is that someone arbitrarily decides that Luffy's immunity must have a cap somewhere convenient, some self-imposed limit that just feels right to them. So you'll often hear things like, Luffy is only immune to blunt force from people around his tier. If someone a tier or two above him punches him, it'll hurt. For example, they'll say, if Luffy's multi-continental, then a moon level or planetary level blunt attack would definitely hurt him. But surely, you can see the problem with that. There's absolutely no basis for this kind of claim. It's just people assigning imaginary limits because they don't like the idea that Luffy is actually immune to something. And I mean, just take a step back and think about it using one of his other immunities. As we mentioned earlier, Luffy is immune to electricity because of his devil fruit. Now imagine someone saying, well, he's only immune to electricity up to his own level. If a lightning bolt is 2 tiers stronger than Luffy, it'll shock him. Like seriously, if Luffy is city level, they'd be saying a mountain level or island level lightning bolt would suddenly fry him. Surely, you can see how ridiculous that is. Applying arbitrary, baseless limits to an established immunity just because you don't like it isn't analysis, it's wishful thinking. And just accusing people of committing a no-limit fallacy when they do not agree with these silly assertions is not an argument either. It is completely unreasonable to expect people to just accept random claims without a shred of evidence-based reasoning. So we're going to ignore those kinds of arguments entirely, because as the famous saying goes, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. However, on the flip side, there are some people who try to call Luffy's blunt force immunity into question entirely by pointing to certain supposed anti-feats in the One Piece anime or manga to justify their point. And honestly, that's fair. In fact, I think that's the right thing to do. You see, if we're going to talk about Luffy's immunity seriously, we have to be willing to look at all the evidence, even the ones that seem to go against the claim. So let's go through each and every one of these so-called anti-feats one by one and see if any of them actually hold up under proper scrutiny. Now let's start with the silliest one, and that's Nami hurting Luffy when she punches him. Yes, I know, not many people use this example seriously, but the fact that anyone does means it's worth addressing. It should be pretty clear to anyone who watches the anime or reads the manga that when Nami punches Luffy and he acts hurt, it's purely a gag. It's comedy, nothing more. You see, Nami herself has always been surprised whenever Luffy was hurt by any kind of blunt force attack, like when they met Garp or when Jinbei used Fishman Karate. She's even flat out stated before that she can't hurt him with regular punches. So yeah, this one's just a running joke, not an actual feat. We can put that one aside. Now, the second supposed anti-feat comes from characters like Garp, Rayleigh, Sengoku, or Kizaru hurting Luffy pre-time skip. And this one's easy. All of those characters obviously know Haki. Garp's Fist of Love isn't a regular punch, it's Haki coated. It's just that before the time skip, Haki wasn't visually colored black yet, so it's easy to misunderstand what's happening. As a matter of fact, even in the post-time skip, the black coloring signifying Haki use is not always there. So again, once you realize that, this one completely falls apart too. Next up, we have Captain Kuro kicking Luffy in the face and supposedly making him bleed. In the next panel, Luffy even says, "You made me bleed," while spitting out blood. So at first glance, it looks like solid evidence, right? Well, not exactly. This is actually a mistranslation. In the official Viz translation, what Luffy really says is, "You made me cut my lip," which makes perfect sense. He just bit his own lip from the force of the hit. The blood wasn't from Kuro somehow bypassing Luffy's rubber immunity. It was from Luffy biting himself by accident. So yeah, this one's debunked too. Then there's the claim that Frankie hurt Luffy with a punch. And honestly, this one's just people looking for something where there's nothing. Luffy wasn't hurt, he just grunted. He does that all the time. You see, Luffy often makes sounds like ouch or ga when something impacts him or when he hits something else, even when it doesn't hurt. It's just a reflexive human reaction. For example, when Kuro kicked him earlier, Luffy said ouch while tumbling down a slope, even though he clearly wasn't injured. As early as chapter 2, he's hit by an iron club straight to the head with 0 damage, and later gets blasted out of the sky by a cannonball. Again, 0 damage. He's even been smashed through buildings or hit by a giant tiger, and comes out completely fine. So these grunts don't mean anything, they're just him reacting instinctively. Luffy even often acknowledges this himself. For example, when Arlong threw him through a building, he yelled and grunted on impact, then immediately said it didn't hurt. Similarly, you have the time on Amazon Lily, where he ran headfirst into a wall, screamed, then literally said it didn't actually hurt at all. Sometimes he even catches himself mid-scream, like during Marineford when he was free falling from the sky. He started yelling, then stopped halfway through because he realized, and thus said, "Oh right, I'm rubber, so I'll be fine." And there's another key detail here. Every time Luffy actually is hurt by blunt force attacks that bypass his immunity, someone points it out. Either Luffy himself or a crewmate or a bystander says something like, "Wait, how could he get hurt? He's rubber." Think back to Skypiea. Usopp says this during the fight with Satori, who used shockwave-based impact dials to hurt Luffy. At Eni's lobby, when Rob Lucci used Rokugan, no one questioned it because that principle had already been established in Skypiea. It's an internal shockwave technique. Later, when Garp hits Luffy with a Haki punch, Sanji comments on it. When Sentomaru does it at Sabaody, Chopper comments on it. When the Snake Sisters squeeze him with Haki, Luffy himself reacts. Even in Impel Down when Blackbeard hurts him, Crocodile calls attention to it. There's a consistent pattern. Whenever something does hurt him, the story tells you why, and that why is always something beyond normal blunt force, usually Haki or shockwaves. So yeah, grunting or saying ouch doesn't prove anything, it's just a reflex. Now speaking of shockwaves, let's talk about attacks like impact dials, Rokugan, Fishman Karate, and Hashoken. These are all shockwave based attacks, and that's important because as I said earlier, a regular blunt force attack means no Haki and no shockwaves. These techniques specifically bypass Luffy's rubber defenses by attacking from inside the body. Jinbei himself himself explained this when he hit Luffy with Fishman Karate. He said that these attacks send shockwaves through the air, directly into a person's body, and those waves then collide with the water inside that body. And even though Luffy is made of rubber, he's still 60% water, so that's how it works. This same concept was introduced all the way back in Skypiea, when Satori explained why his punches could hurt Luffy. They were shockwave based, damaging the body internally. That's also why Usopp was able to hurt Luffy using an impact dial. It was hitting him from the inside. And later, Sai from Dressrosa described Hashokan the same way, a martial art that releases internal shockwaves that bypass external durability. Lucci's Rokugan works on the exact same principle. He doesn't even physically touch Luffy when using it. So none of these are just strong enough blunt force hits. They're literally a different type of damage mechanism altogether. Now the next supposed anti-feat is Lucci and Kobe hurting Luffy with a kick. And honestly, these are clear examples of plot-induced stupidity. In the same arc, Bluno, another CP9 member, explicitly said they can't hurt Luffy with regular blunt force attacks. Lucci himself even confirmed this too. When he used Shigan in his human form, it did nothing. And yes, Luffy was squirming about and grunted after the attack. But again, that doesn't mean damage. Because firstly, we have already established that Luffy often does this even when he's not hurt. And secondly, Luffy could have just been catching his breath since his trachea was briefly compressed. Again, remember, Lucci even says afterward that he can't hurt Luffy with that regular blunt force Shigan, so he switches to his hybrid form, where his claws make Shigan a piercing attack. That's when it actually worked. Hybrid Shigan is piercing, Rokugan is shockwave, and Rankyaku creates slashing wind blades. None of those are regular blunt attacks. They're all literally a different type of damage mechanism altogether. And again, characters like Lucci and Bluno, who at the time both scaled far above Kobe, have confirmed that they can't hurt Luffy with normal blunt force physical attacks. Thus obviously the idea that Kobe can is just ridiculous. Kobe hurting Luffy with a kick is obviously just an example of plot-induced stupidity. Other examples of plot-induced stupidity include Ace hurting Luffy as a child in these panels. Again, this was clearly plot-induced stupidity, because in that same arc, Ace himself even flat out confirms that Luffy can't be hurt by regular blunt force physical attacks. And again, in that same arc, it was a major theme that Luffy cannot be hurt by regular blunt force physical attacks, no matter how much stronger than him you are. This is why when fully grown adult men who were beating on Kid Luffy with even a giant wooden hammer that was bigger than Luffy at the time, they could not hurt Luffy, and Luffy reminded them of this. This is why to hurt Kid Luffy, the fully grown over 3-meter tall adult man, Porch Emmy, had to switch to spiked gloves instead of a huge blunt force hammer, thus converting the attack from a regular blunt force physical attack to a piercing attack, which again is a different damage mechanism that Luffy is not immune to. Finally, let's address Foxy hurting Luffy with a punch. Now, you'll note, when he boxed Luffy, he was using regular boxing gloves at first, and those punches did absolutely nothing. In fact, in the official translation, Foxy himself literally admits that he knows his punches themselves won't affect Luffy because he's a rubberman. This was mistranslated in the fan translation. But I mean, even without this, it is obviously clear that when he actually hurt Luffy, he had switched to spiked gloves. Again, he literally said this, and you can literally see this. And this was basically the same situation that happened with Luffy as a child, with Porch Emmy switching to spiked gloves to hurt Luffy. Even when Foxy used his punching machine, which had on regular boxing gloves, you'll note that the punches were on fire. But again, even ignoring all of that, even if Luffy did have some blunt force physical attack threshold that could be overcome, like who would honestly make the case that Foxy would be the person with the raw blunt force physical strength to do this? Like, really? Come on now. So yeah, those are the most common so-called anti-feats people use to argue against Luffy's immunity to regular blunt force physical attacks. But as we've gone through each one, you can see that none of them actually hold up under proper inspection. Not one. Every single case either involves haki, shockwaves, piercing damage, or straight up comedic or plot-induced exaggeration. So I think it's safe to say, Luffy's immunity to regular blunt force physical attacks still stands strong. But let's also take a moment to talk about a few important mechanical considerations behind Luffy's immunity, because understanding how it actually works helps clear up a lot of misconceptions. Firstly, while a Weaver card once implied that Luffy can stretch infinitely, that's not actually true. You see, during the Whole Cake Island arc, it was subtly hinted that if Luffy were to stretch far enough, his body could theoretically rip. But again, his immunity to regular blunt force attacks doesn't depend on him being able to stretch infinitely or anywhere close to infinite. For example, imagine a massive crushing attack, like the mountain-sized dinosaur remains that Dory placed on Luffy, or that time Shadow Asgard Moria trapped him inside the black box and stepped on him with a force strong enough to split the island of Thriller Bark. In both of those cases, Luffy's body simply flattens. He doesn't need to stretch to some absurd degree to accommodate those attacks. And even outside of crushing attacks, most of the time when Luffy takes a hit, his whole body moves with it. So stretching on a macro scale isn't really a major factor in how he tanks blunt damage. The only time his elasticity could theoretically become a weak point is if he himself allows his body to stretch unnaturally far for the sake of building recoil force. Like when Hody Jones punched him and Luffy let his head stretch backward to sling forward with greater impact. In that kind of situation, yes, a sufficiently powerful blow could, in theory, stretch him beyond his natural limit, potentially tearing his body. But again, that would require a very specific set of conditions. You see, Luffy would have to choose to allow that to happen. It's not something that would occur passively. In most normal circumstances, especially with attacks above a certain magnitude of force, his entire body just moves with the force instead of resisting it locally. And even if we entertain the idea of a stretching limit, it's incredibly high. For example, in the Drum Kingdom arc, Luffy casually stretched his arms farther than the height of the Drum Rockies, which are said to reach up to 5 kilometers tall. That alone tells you how absurdly elastic he already is. And what's even more important is that Luffy's elasticity and even his intrinsic resistance to blunt force aren't static. They evolve as his mastery over his devil fruit evolves. For instance, as we mentioned earlier in this discussion, haki-coated attacks are one of the few things that can bypass his rubbery immunity. But then, in Dressrosa, when Luffy unlocked Gear 4, we saw that even that limitation started to fade. Doflamingo, who was using armament haki, kicked Gear 4 Luffy directly, and the attack did nothing. In fact, Doflamingo was visibly shocked that his haki-infused blow had no effect, and he maintained his rubbery durability. And this gets pushed even further in Wano with Gear 5, where, even though he's not completely immune to higher level Conqueror's haki attacks, his body can now adapt to them. You can literally see him morph, compress, and rebound around Kaido's attacks. Again, with Gear 5, the Gorosei even point out that his rubbery body gains even greater freedom. Then of course, there are special forms like Tankman, where Luffy can even neutralize piercing attacks, something he's usually vulnerable to. So yeah, at this point, questioning whether Luffy is immune to regular blunt force physical attacks is not only silly, but it is even outdated. We're far beyond that now. And again, just to really drive this point home, Luffy's blunt force immunity isn't some fan-made headcanon or overinterpretation. It's literally stated in all of the official databooks. And beyond that, more importantly, it has been a clear, consistent, and repeatedly demonstrated theme throughout both the One Piece anime and manga. You see, this isn't something we have to infer. It's something that's been proven again and again since the very beginning of the story. As a child, Luffy was beaten by fully grown adults, men far stronger than him at the time, wielding a massive wooden hammer that was literally bigger than he was. And despite all that, it had absolutely no effect on him whatsoever. Then, in literally the second chapter of the entire manga, Luffy takes a direct hit to the head from an iron club, a club that had already been shown to destroy large wooden structures, and yet it does nothing. Not a scratch, not a bruise, nothing. Right after that, he's shot out of the sky by a cannonball, crashes back down to earth, and once again, zero damage. No injury, no pain, no visible strain. And this trend continues consistently. He's been punched through buildings by Zoro, slammed by Arlong, crushed by a tiger, and every single time, the result is the same. Absolutely no effect. On Little Garden, it gets even crazier. You see, Little Garden is a prehistoric island filled with dinosaurs and ancient remnants, including giant mountain-sized dinosaur skulls. At one point, one of these massive fossilized heads, basically a small mountain, is dropped directly onto Luffy's lower body. And again, nothing. He's completely fine, completely unbothered. And this isn't just something we as the audience notice. Characters within the story explicitly state it too. Multiple times characters have flat out said that Luffy cannot be hurt by regular blunt force physical attacks. It's not ambiguous, it's textual. There is overwhelming repeated confirmation from both in-universe dialogue and external materials that this is a core property of his rubber body. And then you can take one of the most impressive demonstrations that perfectly encapsulates this, the interaction with Gecko Moria during the Thriller Bark arc. Moria, already massive in his normal state, transforms into his Shadow Asgard form, becoming comparable in size to his entire castle. In this form, his physical power increases dramatically, enough that he can split an island with a single punch. During his fight with Luffy, Moria traps him in a pitch-black shadow box, so small that Luffy can't even move or stretch, and then proceeds to punch that box with his full island-splitting force. The impact completely crushes both the box and everything inside it. And then Moria doesn't stop there. He steps on the box, stomping it even further into the ground with the same island-splitting strength. And what happens next? Luffy casually pops out of the rubble, completely unharmed. He doesn't wince, he doesn't bleed, he doesn't even act like it was painful. He just walks out, looks at Moria, and basically says, "Nice try, but I didn't take any damage because I'm rubber." So when you look at all of this, all the explicit statements, all the databook confirmations, all the countless feats from early East Blue to Thriller Bark and beyond, and then you realize that none of the supposed anti-feats actually hold up under inspection, it becomes very clear what the truth is. Luffy isn't just resistant to regular blunt force physical attacks. No, he's immune. And trying to just arbitrarily invent supposed convenient 1 to 2 times higher or similar tier limits for his immunity is just cope. But anyway, that's the video guys. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. But anyway, see you guys next time.